I'd like to bring this meeting to order. This is the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We're in meeting number 38 and considering the security issues with the former minister. Would somebody like to close the doors there, please? That's the order of the Liberals. Okay. We'd like to welcome to our committee today witnesses from the Privy Council office, and the usual practice at this committee is to allow you opening statement of approximately 10 minutes or so, and then we proceed to questions and comments. I think if you wouldn't mind today, if you'd introduce yourselves and maybe give us an idea of your position within the Privy Council office, it would be helpful. Just a brief description of what you do there, and then go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Margaret Bloodworth. I'm the Associate Secretary to the Cabinet and the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. I have with me Ms. Rennie Marcoux, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Cabinet for Security and Intelligence, and Mr. Mark Tardif, who is the Director of Security Operations for the Privy Council Office. I have a brief opening statement, Mr. Chair, in which I've tried to put as much information as possible, which hopefully would be helpful. I believe the members have copies. We did provide copies in both languages. So, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to appear before the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security to explain the role of the Privy Council Office in the matters the committee is studying. The role of
the Privy Council Office is to provide non-partisan advice and support to the Prime Minister, ministers within the Prime Minister's portfolio, the Cabinet and Cabinet committees. Among its many roles, the PCO advises the Prime Minister and Cabinet on national security and intelligence issues. The PCO works closely with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and other agencies to coordinate security arrangements for the Prime Minister, the Governor-General, Cabinet, and visiting government leaders, as well as security for major events such as the 2010 Olympics and the 2010 G8 Summit.
To assist the Prime Minister in the exercise of his prerogative to appoint persons to high public office, including Cabinet, the Privy Council Office is responsible for conducting background checks, the nature of which I will describe more fully in a moment, on all prospective Order and Council appointees and all prospective Cabinet appointees. At this point, it's important to distinguish clearly between background checks and security clearances and to put the usage of both in context. A background check is conducted on prospective Cabinet appointees in order to ensure there is no criminal, security, or other concerns which could affect their suitability for public office. They have always been done only on the prospective appointee, not their spouse or companion at the time of the background check or immediate family members. For prospective Cabinet members, the background check currently consists of a four-part verification. First, a check of criminal records and suspected involvement in criminal activity by the RCMP. Secondly, a security assessment by CSIS. Thirdly, a check for tax compliance issues by the Canada Revenue Agency. And finally, an insolvency check with the Superintendent of Bankruptcy. Background checks of prospective Cabinet appointees date back at least to the 1960s. For Order and Council appointees to non-Cabinet positions, background checks have been consistently performed since the early 80s. This government decided last August to update these checks for Cabinet ministers every 2 years, whether or not the minister changes office. A security clearance is conducted for public servants and for certain contractors and consultants as a means of determining their reliability and loyalty before they are given access to classified information required to perform their work. There are 3 levels of security clearance above basic reliability: confidential, secret, and top secret. A security clearance process is initiated at the departmental level. It consists of an RCMP criminal records check and a CSIS security assessment. A credit check is performed if the nature of the duties requires it. For a top secret clearance, a credit check is always performed, as well as a CSIS field investigation. The investigation is again done only on the individual, but issues of concern relating to close family members may arise during the process, particularly if there is a field investigation. Cabinet ministers do not receive a security clearance. This has been a long-standing practice of successive governments in Canada and is consistent with the approach in the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and Australia. All ministers and secretaries of state, when they take office, swear an oath as a Privy Councillor that includes a commitment to keep secret all matters revealed to them in their capacity as members of the Queen's Privy Council. It's also worth noting there's currently no provision for the Government of Canada to provide security clearances to members of the House of Commons or senators. Au moment d'être nommé, les ministres
Upon taking office, all Cabinet ministers are provided with written guidance set out in the publicly available Accountable Government, a guide for ministers and secretaries of state, on the core principles regarding their role and responsibilities as ministers, and the standards of conduct which they should uphold. The Accountable Government Guide underscores their personal accountability with respect to security, including the security of their offices.
Operations at the Privy Council office or a member of his senior staff briefs each minister individually and in person on applicable security requirements and responsibilities as they relate to themselves, their staff, and their offices. They are reminded of their oath of secrecy in relation to Cabinet confidences and the controls around such information. In addition, ministers are made aware of the security measures to follow when discussing or transporting sensitive information. The briefing includes information about their responsibilities and those of their staff for the protection of sensitive information and assets, appropriate measures to take in that regard, and the role of the Departmental Security Advisor. With respect to classified documents, the Privy Council Office is responsible for ensuring the security of Cabinet documents. Control of Cabinet documents across the government is managed by the Privy Council Office's Cabinet Papers System Unit. Cabinet documents, such as memoranda to Cabinet, are strictly controlled by that unit. Copies are barcoded to enable tracking, and distribution of the documents is limited to authorized recipients. The CPSU requires departments to appoint Cabinet document controllers who are responsible for maintaining a register, ensuring secure distribution of documents within their organization, and returning them to that unit. A second class of classified documents are from intelligence agencies, and those classified documents are handled in accordance with the protocols established by the originating agency. A third category of classified documents originating within departments are handled in accordance with the procedures established within that department and the standards set out by the Treasury Board. Security is a subject that senior public servants take very seriously. We continually seek to improve current measures and to learn from experience in order to ensure adequate protection of sensitive information and assets of the Government of Canada. However, no system is immune from human error. En raison du caractère confidentiel,
in the context of the confidentiality of the aforementioned security procedures and the privacy rights of individuals, the committee will understand that there are limits to our ability to answer questions about individuals.
Taking into account the confidentiality of security procedures and the privacy rights of individuals as to our ability to answer questions. However, consistent with that, we would note, first, background checks were completed on Mr. Bernier prior to his appointment to Cabinet in February 2006 and pursuant to the 2-year updating of background checks in April of 2008, in accordance with the standard security procedures outlined above. In neither case were issues raised by the various agencies involved in the process. At no time has the RCMP informed PCO about any security concerns with respect to Mr. Bernier or his relationship with Madame Couillard. The documents that Madame Couillard's lawyers returned to Mr. Bernier's office were classified at the secret level. They were not Cabinet documents and originated within Mr. Bernier's department as part of the classified departmental briefing for the Minister for the NATO meeting in Bucharest in April of this year. With this overview, Mr. Chairman, I would be pleased to take questions from the members of the committee.
Thank you very much. And we'll immediately move to questions and comments, beginning with the Liberal Party. And the first one on my list is Mr. Desange. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here with us. My questions hopefully are brief. We have very little time. I would hope your answers are as brief and precise to fit that time. You indicate that at no time the RCMP informed PCO about any security concerns in this matter. You also indicate that the second background checks would have been done in April of 2008, in keeping with the requirement of every 2 years. I'm assuming that those checks were completed by the RCMP in April 2008. Are you then suggesting to me that even in April 2008, despite the fact that the RCMP knew of Ms. Couillard, knew of her background, knew that she had a relationship with Mr. Bernier by then, that they did not raise any security concerns with you after that check?
As I stated in my statement, Mr. Desange, at no time has the RCMP informed PCO
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted
about any security concerns with regard to Mr. Bernier or his relationship with Madame Couillard.
Thank you. Now, did the PCO, independent of the RCMP, anyone in the PCO, know of Bernier-Couillard relationship and Madame Couillard's background and any security concerns with respect thereto before the matter arose in the public domain in early May?
Well, we're certainly aware of Mr. Bernier's relationship with Madame Couillard, at least back to last summer.
Yes?
I'm not sure what the thrust of your question is.
Well, the thrust of my question is, the RCMP would have known of the background of Madame Couillard, and they knew of Madame Couillard the day, they recognized Madame Couillard the day she appeared in August of last year with Mr. Bernier, and they also knew of, she was known to the police before. And you're saying to me that you, despite all of that, did not know of her background or any security concerns with respect thereto, independent of the RCMP. The question that I have, I'm assuming you've informed yourself about all the matters relating to this issue. I want to know whether the PCO, anyone in the PCO, knew of the background of Madame Couillard and any security concerns with respect thereto before the matter arose in the public domain.
Mr. Desange, at the moment, I don't know of any security concerns about Madame Couillard. I only know what I read in the papers. And with due respect, we don't make decisions based on speculation in the media. So what we do, I described the process we do with background checks. That was followed in this case. And I rely on expert advice from people that are involved in the business of doing that. We do not conduct our own independent investigations.
I'm asking, my question is not just directed to you, it's directed to any one of us. Is there anyone in the PCO that raised, after knowing about Madame Couillard's relationship with Mr. Bernier, any concerns with respect to national security or otherwise within the PCO? And that's my question.
And I repeat, Mr. Assange, we do not do independent
I
investigations.
didn't ask you that. I said, did you know, were there any questions raised with you or with anyone else? Were there any concerns raised within the PCO about national security or Madam Kuya's background? I didn't ask you whether or not you check in these situations.
Well, we do check, Mr. Assange, and I described the process by which we check and which we rely on
I know
for
that.
security information.
I know that. I want to know whether anyone within the PCO, whether any red flags went up anywhere within the PCO before early May 2008 with respect to this matter.
Well, I think I've answered that question, Mr. Assange.
And what is the answer?
The answer is we rely on the checks
No,
done
the
by
answer is
professional agencies.
the question is, did
not
the red
on the
flag?
media.
No,
We
that's
read
not
the
the
media.
question. Did the red flags go up or not? That's the question.
I don't understand the question of red flags.
Well,
I have tried to explain what we do
No,
professionally, and that's what we did in
Ms.
this case.
Ms. Bloodworth, you know the meaning of the red flags, and the question I have for you is, was there anyone within the PCO, the breadth and length of PCO, that was concerned at any time before early May 2008 about Madam Kuya's background and any national security or other concerns? If you say to me, no, nobody ever raised it, we didn't, it wasn't brought to our attention, we didn't think of it, I'd be satisfied. That answered my question.
I'm trying to answer it in a professional way, Mr. Assange. We certainly read the media reports and are aware of the speculation. We do not make decisions on the basis of
I
speculation.
did not ask you whether or not you thought of these issues after the issue became public. I asked you whether or not these concerns were present in the minds of anyone within the PCO at the time prior to early May 2008.
And I repeat that in early April, the second round of checks, second-year checks of all ministers, including Mr. Bernier, was complete, and there were no concerns
Thank
raised.
you. The question I have is, you must have been aware of the RCMP evidence before this committee that they could not tell us for reasons of their own, because they say we may be doing something, it may jeopardize something we may have done, we may be doing. They couldn't tell us whether or not they contacted the PCO with respect to this matter. Now, after that, the PCO went out and clarified that to the effect that PCO didn't hear from the RCMP with respect to these concerns at all. First of all, how did that come about? Secondly, did you consider at any time that by going public with that information, you may be jeopardizing something that the RCMP may have done or may be doing, which is what they said to us?
Well, the PCO did not comment on anything that the RCMP may have been doing. I did read Mr. Deputy Commissioner Sukar's evidence, and I certainly think it was appropriate that he didn't tell what he tells us about background checks. We do not normally reveal background checks.
No, that's not the question. The question to the RCMP was, did you contact the PCO in this matter? They said, we couldn't tell you that, because that might involve jeopardizing something we may have done or we may be doing. The question I have for you is, did you consider that before going public, that you may be jeopardizing something that the RCMP may be doing or may have done?
7 minutes goes by very quickly. Let's have time for a brief answer here.
Well, let me try once again to answer that. I agree with the RCMP that it is not the practice in this government or indeed any previous government to talk about the results of background checks.
I didn't ask you that. I said whether or not they raised any red flags with PCO. They flatly told us they couldn't tell us that, yes or no. They weren't going to answer that question. You answered it for the public. Did you consider at that time that you might be jeopardizing any investigation that they may have undertaken or they may be undertaking? Because that's what they said to us.
Okay, now we're going to go over to Monsieur Menard, please.
Thanks very much for coming in today, Ms. Bloodworth. But I would like to know this. I understand that you're not in the highest position in the PCO. There's someone higher than you. I apologize. Mr. Lynch, I believe Mr. Lynch is in the highest position. Yes. In a very sensitive case where the RCMP would think that the minister is for relationship reasons, is getting into a position that could be dangerous for security, isn't that something that would be handled only by Mr. Lynch within the PCO?
Mr. Lynch would certainly be involved in anything involving cabinet ministers.
Vous le sauriez-vous que M. Lynch a été averti par la...
Would you know that Mr. Lynch was informed by the RCMP that the situation was delicate or sensitive?
RCMP to contact me. It's not impossible they could contact Mr. Lynch, but they didn't.
OK, donc ça passerait par vous.
So they would go through you. Yes, generally speaking, necessarily they would go through you. No, not necessarily, but generally it would.
It's not a rule that it has to be. If I was not available, they could talk to Mr. Lynch.
Oui, mais c'est justement une question très délicate. Parce que...
But it is a sensitive question because we're talking about a relationship of one of the ministers where there could be a danger to security. Is it possible that only one person in the PCO would know about it and that you would not know it?
I guess anything is possible. It's possible.
Enfin, c'est selon les procédures.
But it's not the case in this case, if that's your question.
Bon, OK. Ben, comment savez-vous?
Well, how do you know that? Well, let's move to something else. You say that you provide information and advice to ministers as to how they should handle the secret documents that they receive. That's what you say, is it not? Yes. What do you say about secret files? What are the precautions that they are supposed to take when they have to study them outside of their offices?
Well, there's several measures, and I'll turn to Mr. Tardif if I forget some. In general, there first of all are locked briefcases provided to ministers. Secondly, they can have safes in their homes and locations, and a number do. Secondly, they have staff who can transport documents for them.
C'est pas ça qui me pose tellement de problèmes, mais j'imagine.
That's not what bothers me, but I imagine a number of ministers tend to work after dinner to spread out documents on the dining room table, whatever, or things like that, or in a hotel room to open up their documents, to have a shower, whatever, come back. Do you give them any particular information about the way of looking after those documents with any people that might be with them?
Great care when they take documents and outside of the office, and not to leave them in public spaces, and to be careful about talking about things in public areas, if that's your question.
Bon,
I'm not sure
non, justement, ma question va un peu plus loin, mais j'imagine que vous y répondrez volontiers.
My question goes a little farther. I imagine you'll answer it. But it could happen that the person who a minister shares his life with may see some secret documents. Isn't that right? Yes. Well, you never thought it advisable to investigate the partners or spouses of ministers. You never had any reason to investigate the partners or spouses of ministers.
Just to be clear, we don't investigate anyone. What we do are background checks through the various agencies, and those background checks are done on, yes, if that's your question, are done on the potential appointee, or in the case of the updates, on the person in the position, not on their spouses.
There's never been an incident in the past that suggested that there should have been a summary investigation done of people, of partners of ministers.
It would be either the police or the security agency, depending on the circumstances. We're not an investigative agency, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Theoretically, you would agree with me that an individual that has had a relationship, an ongoing relationship with a number of members of a number of criminal organizations represents a security risk, and as far as possible should not be in the presence of secret documents.
You're asking me in theory if that could represent a danger? Yes, it could.
Bon. Je comprends
I'm
que vous
not
dites.
commenting on this case because I don't know enough of the facts to comment on.
Je sais. Je comprends que vous nous laissez.
I understand that you're leaving us in the area of speculation because you cannot tell the truth. We would like to know what the truth is, but in any case, there is part of this that we do know. You say as well that from your experience, you always trying to improve.
I hope that my colleague didn't say that the witness wasn't telling the truth. Because if he did, that's...
C'est une erreur, c'est clairement une erreur de traduction, M. McKenzie. C'est pas ça que j'ai dit.
It's be a translation mistake. That's not what I was saying. That's not what I was saying. I'll explain you sometime later on in English. I know that Ms. Woodworth understood what I was getting at. You're trying to improve things based on your experiences that you've had. You try to improve your procedures, your background checks based on the experiences you've had. Is that not correct?
Alors, de découvrir à un moment donné.
So if you were to find out at one point that a minister had developed a relationship with someone who had had a serious and ongoing relationship over years with various members of organized crime, don't you think that in exceptional cases like that, and things that could be checked in criminal data banks, that there would be reasons to conduct a more thorough investigation?
Well, again, I don't do investigations, and it is always possible to change the procedures for background checks. Governments from time to time in the past have.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Pretty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions. One just of clarification. I think it says in here that if it is a cabinet document, it is, however you mark it. What did you say? Sorry.
Barcoded.
Okay. But that the document that is referred to here was not a cabinet document, but was a document that was generated within the ministry of Monsieur Bernier. And do you know, or do you have responsibility for, how ministries then track documents that are classified as secret? Or does everybody just kind of do their own thing?
No, they don't just all do their own thing. Deputy ministers and departments are responsible for setting out the procedures in their department, but there are standards set by the Treasury Board within which they do that.
And do you happen to know, okay, so would you know what those are? I mean, since this is a document, it's a secret document, it was still left in a place where anyone could have access to it, whose responsibility would it have been to have traced this to know that it was missing? Would it have been the deputy ministers? Would it have been Treasury boards? Whose would it have been?
Well, the short answer is I don't know because the review has not been completed in this case. But if I can try and be a little more helpful, deputy ministers are responsible for setting out the procedures for handing documents in their departments, but ministers are also responsible for things that are within their office. In this case, we have a minister, a former minister, who took responsibility for the fact that an error was made, and he has resigned.
Okay, but only after the documents were missing for a period of time, 5 weeks. So it puzzles me as to a system that would be in place that would have secret documents missing for 5 weeks and not have a tracing that would at least alert the deputy minister to that. That is not your responsibility. Do I understand you to say that you would only, I'm not arguing your point, but that you would only initiate further background checks if the RCMP alerted you to the need to do that? Would you accept information from any place else, or would it only be from the RCMP?
No.
Other than the regular ones that you do. I understand that part.
Okay. Let me say, first of all, if there's any reason to do any criminal investigation or any security investigation, that would not involve me, and in fact, it would be inappropriate to involve me in that. I don't control any of that, nor should I. The purpose of background checks is to provide advice to a prime minister when a prime minister is making decisions about his or her cabinet. And what the purpose of what we do is to provide that information to the prime minister in order for the prime minister to decide what he wants, whether he wants that person in the cabinet or not. That's the whole purpose of background checks.
Yes, I have spent 10 years in a cabinet, and I understand that. But so if there was a reason for the RCMP to be concerned about someone's background from a criminal perspective or from a criminal attachment to criminal's perspective, if that is not your responsibility, and I take your point, I take your word that it is not, whose is it?
It's the RCMP's responsibility to conduct criminal investigations.
And so if they conduct a criminal investigation on someone who is a partner of a minister, it just stays within the RCMP? It doesn't, the prime minister is never informed?
No, but that's a different issue. I would expect if there was a significant security concern relating to a minister that the RCMP would inform me. But not in order to do something about it. They would inform me so the prime minister could do something about the cabinet minister.
Yes, no, I perfectly understand that you would not be doing something about it, that you would simply be alerting the prime minister. Yes, no, I realize it's the prime minister who's accountable for doing something, but that information would be passed to you, that you would then pass to the prime minister.
I would expect if there was a significant security concern regarding involving a minister of the cabinet that the RCMP were aware of, they would tell me.
Okay.
Or in my absence, Mr. Lynch.
Okay. Is it, I think I want to reaffirm a statement that I think you made earlier. It is possible that Mr. Lynch would have information that you do not.
It's certainly possible, but I said in this case he didn't. In the case before the committee, I know that because I've discussed it with him. He doesn't. Okay. But it's not impossible. Mr. Lynch could have, in fact, it's quite probable in some case he would have some information, he would have information I don't have.
All right. So your concern would be, or your expectation would be, if the RCMP had security concerns or criminal concerns about someone who was connected in a significant way to a minister, that information would be transferred to you, and for you to transfer to the prime minister.
That's not quite what I said, if I could correct that. I said I would expect if the RCMP had significant security concerns relating to a minister of the cabinet, they would let me know.
Okay, that's what I thought I said, but perhaps it's a matter of words. And so when the and it is only the RCMP that would pass information on to you? Would there be anybody else?
Well, if it's criminal, yes. It's not impossible if it was national security of some kind concern. It might have been CSIS. It depends the nature of the concern.
Okay. And okay, that's fine for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go over to Mr. McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Ms. Bloodworth, and your folks for being here today. I think your answers have been very clear and understandable. I'm not sure if everybody wants to look at it that way, but what I think I heard you say, and if you can clarify for me, these procedures have been in place for a number of years. The only exception is that this government, this Prime Minister, has asked that those checks be updated every 2 years for cabinet ministers?
Background checks have been in place for a number of years. There have been amendments made over the years to the way in which background checks are done. An example, they did not involve a tax compliance check at the very beginning. They now do. So there have been that form of, and I'm not sure it was always a check about bankruptcy. That's been added. But the checks themselves have been conducted since at least the early 60s, some form of background check.
So there's been no change. It's been basically the same for a number of years. And sometimes if people want to believe that it's another way, they can believe that, but in fact that's the way it is. And if we want to change it going forward, we could change it if that was the desire, I'm sure.
I've tried very hard to stay with what the facts are related
Absolutely.
to this, and that's why I did set out in my opening statement. But of course, processes can always be changed.
Okay. And if I understood you correctly, you did not have any information that your office went to the Prime Minister with.
With
I mean,
regard,
there have been allegations that PCO must have told the Prime Minister about this situation, whatever is perceived to be wrong with it, that PCO must have told the Prime Minister, and that, in fact, is not true. You have not had information provided to you by the RCMP, and so you have not gone to the Prime Minister with nothing you don't have.
I'm not sure I followed all of that, Mr. McKenzie, but I'll repeat, PCO has never at any time been provided by the RCMP with any security concerns related to Mr. Bernier or his relationship with Madame Couillard. So by implication, we could not have gone to the Prime Minister with that.
Okay. And I think that's, I think that's been one of the issues that we've been dealing with. And the other issue is that somehow, and I understand fully what you're telling us, that you do not investigate, you take your information from the investigative agencies like CSIS and the RCMP.
That's right. Our role is an advisory role, not an investigative role.
And I think that I think you've made it abundantly clear through today's appearance before this committee. And I guess that the only other thing is that I think you've made it clear that those PCO not doing investigative backgrounds would not get into the areas that some of my colleagues have talked about that it seems the world knew, except that most of us didn't, about individuals that might associate or might not associate with a cabinet minister. That's not your role.
Well, I've tried very hard, Mr. Chair, to stick to just what the facts I know and the processes that are in place and not to speculate. I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but that's what I've tried hard to do.
Fair enough, and that's the only questions I have, sir.
And the processes as they exist, obviously things could change, but that's how they exist.
You sharing your time with
You want to ask a question? No?
Ms. Jennings, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bloodworth. You say you don't know a great deal about this particular case. So, exactly on what date did you find out about the past of Ms. Couillard? You said that you'd known since last summer that Ms. Couillard and Mr. Bernier were together. But the question about her past, well, when exactly did you find out about that? What was the date? And when did the PCO find out about that? Find out what? About her past, her ties to organized crime, the biker gangs, criminally organized biker gangs. On what date did you find out about her background, Ms. Couillard's background? And when did the PCO find out about it?
The question is, what I know to date is what I read in the newspapers. I am not privy to anything other than what's in the newspapers. So I don't know what the exact date it started in the newspapers. That's what I know.
Alors, si je vous comprends bien,
If I understand you correctly, no one in the government, regardless of the department, regardless of the agency, whether we're talking about CSIS, whether we're talking about the RCMP, or the Department of Foreign Affairs, or Privy Council, or the Department of Transport, or the Department of Public Security, or the Prime Minister's office itself, no one officially informed the Privy Council office that Ms. Couillard, and you say that last summer you knew that she was romantically linked to Minister Bernier when he was the minister. You said that you did a 2-year background check on the minister in April 2008, so you know that there was a relationship between the two of them, and that you never had been officially informed by anyone at all about her past, and that the only way that you heard about it was through the media.
I think I've answered that question. I have not been to this date informed. I don't know for a fact what's in the newspapers. I know the allegations that are in the newspapers.
Et au niveau du bureau du conseil privé,
And when it's in the Privy Council, you say that personally you were never informed officially by anyone whatsoever, any government representative, about Ms. Couillard's past, that all the information you have on that come from the media, so that you don't even know whether this information is accurate or not. Is there anyone within Privy Council who was officially informed about her problematic past at any point whatsoever?
You are premising that all of that is fact, and I don't know if it's fact. I've tried to be helpful about what we do know and the process we use to find out. I can say, if you're asking if there's somebody other than me,
okay, I'll make it simple for you. The RCMP came here and testified that Madame Couillard was a person known to them. That's fact. They came here, they testified. So I'm asking, at any time, has anyone in the Privy Council been informed formally by anybody in any department that Madame Couillard was known to the police?
No, I heard Mr. Sukar, Deputy Commissioner Sukar's testimony. But
And the
no
question is no, not you, not anyone else at Privy Council, at any time, not even to this date.
Well, to this date, I heard Deputy Commissioner Sukar.
And so that's the first time you knew officially that anyone at Privy Council knew officially that Madame Couillard was known to the police. When Officer Couillard came and testified here and made the statement and the affirmation.
Well, and I don't know yet what he meant by that. Nor would it be appropriate for me to know. I'm not blaming him for not telling me, because they don't tell me about all criminal investigations or any other investigations.
Mrs. Bloodworth, when you keep saying I, are you speaking for yourself personally, or you're speaking for yourself and on behalf of everyone at Privy Council?
I'm speaking for the Privy Council office.
Thank you. I'm glad you made that clarification. So your statement is that the Privy Council only learned that Madame Couillard was a person known to the police on the day and as a result of the testimony of Officer Sukar of the RCMP when he appeared before this committee Tuesday of last week.
I know what he said then.
Okay, we'll move on to, is it Ms. Tilak? Oh, Mr. Menard? Okay.
Je sais qu'il y a des questions.
I know there are some questions that you don't want to answer because you don't have the right to do so, or you feel it would not be appropriate. So I'm going to ask you some of those questions, and you'll tell me whether it's yes, no, or I cannot answer. Okay?
I will try. Not all questions are answerable by yes or no, but I will try.
Ou je ne peux pas, vous le dites.
No, but I meant sometimes the yes or no answer is not sufficient, but I will try.
Cela ne suffit pas, mais je vais essayer.
In the PCO, were you concerned about the relationship between Mr. Bernier and Ms. Couillard? Now? No. At any time? Now? Well, at the moment, you're not concerned. But before that. The answer is no. Not that you cannot answer. The answer is no.
I think I answered that.
Okay. Why did you issue a press release recently to say that the RCMP had never been in touch with you?
Well, that's a good question, because it's not normally something we would answer, as Deputy Commissioner Sukar said, and it is always a difficult slope to go down of talking about security clearances. But the decision was made in the Privy Council office that, given the speculation there, that we in this case, it was better to actually say. But you're right to point out that that is not normally what we would do. We normally do not speak about background checks, whether it's for this government or any other government.
Mais vous saviez que vous y alliez venir devant le comité.
But you knew you would be appearing before this committee.
Bon.
I may have, but I can't actually recall. It wasn't really part of the decision. Anyway, I'm sorry, I can't remember when I knew.
Avez-vous accès au conseil privé à des banques de renseignement criminel?
Do you have access to criminal data banks in PCO? No. I also understand the answer you gave about the RCMP also applies for this to CSIS. CSIS never got in touch with you to speak about the past of Ms. Couillard. They confirmed that they had no role to play in the case of Mr. Bernier and Ms. Couillard. Your role, you said, is to advise the Prime Minister on security and intelligence matters. At one point, when did you notice in the newspapers that Ms. Couillard had had an involvement with members of organized crime?
Bon, mais vous lisez les journaux, j'imagine.
Yes, and when it was in the papers.
You do read the newspapers. And it did happen quite early on in May of 2008. Oh.
Maintenant,
Whenever it was in the papers.
je comprends que vous ne vous basez que sur des informations.
I know you're just basing yourself on information. You're not talking about speculation, but sometimes there's speculation that is disturbing if it were to be confirmed. Isn't that right? What I want to know, when you say that you found out from the newspapers, that Ms. Couillard had a relationship with members of the Hells Angels, one of whom was killed, and another one who changed sides and so on. When did you read that? Wasn't there a concern then that the minister's relationship might be worrisome for security, and that there would be reason to speak to the RCMP?
Well, the first point I will reiterate, because I'm always leery about there being insinuations made that I don't know the facts are. I don't know the facts of Madame Couillard's background. I only know what I read in the paper. Secondly, when I did read it, as you recall, the second round of checks had just been done.
Point of order. I believe that Mrs. Bloodworth would like to correct. She just made the statement. She doesn't know the facts. She only knows what she reads in the paper. But she just testified that she is aware of the testimony of Officer Sukar before this committee on the record officially that Madame Couillard is a person known to the RCMP.
Not a point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Bernard.
Well, that's certainly correct. I have read Deputy Commissioner Sukar's testimony, and I guess I know what he said in that testimony.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot the question.
Merci. Madame Woodward.
Ms. Bloodworth, you seem to be quite rigid, and you seem to have only certain procedures to follow, and you don't have any flexibility to adapt to a completely unusual situation, but one that presents security risks. And I'm quite sure that you do have that capacity, and that you have this duty, in fact, to adapt to unusual circumstances. So you read in the newspaper that the partner of a minister has had a significant involvement with organized crime, with dangerous people. You have even recognized that this could lead to a security problem. Perhaps it was just speculation, but didn't you feel like asking the RCMP to check into those facts and to find out whether or not that was true?
I do remember the second point I was going to make, which was, as you recall, the second round of checks, which included something from the RCMP as well as from CSIS and the other checks had just been completed when that came out. They were completed in early to mid-April. So I had just recently heard from the RCMP.
Okay, we'll go over to Mr. Norlock. Next, please.
Thank you. Thank you for coming today, witnesses. This question will be, unfortunately, again for Ms. Bloodworth. Have you received or did you receive from any political party, the official opposition or any opposition party, did they call you or write you or let you know in any way, or anyone in the PCO, that they had personally some serious concerns with regard to national security, and in particular around the relationship the Minister of Foreign Affairs had with Ms. Couillard?
No, I didn't. No.
Thank you. At any time from the beginning of this issue to the end?
No.
Thank you.
But
that's all.
You all knew her.
Okay, Mr. Cullen.
And thank you, Ms. Bloodworth, Madame Marcoux, and Mr. Tardif. I find it amazing that when the RCMP did their updated background checks in April 2008, that they didn't flag this as an issue. But we'll have to leave that for the question of the RCMP, because at that point in time, they knew about the relationship between Mr. Bernier and Madame Couillard, and clearly Madame Couillard was a person of interest. She may not have been convicted, but she certainly was on their file. So we'll save that for the RCMP.
I don't know that she was, excuse me, Mr. Cullen, I don't know, I haven't seen anyone say she was a person of interest, and the reason I interrupt is because, as you know, those terms can be used differently. I did hear Deputy Commissioner Sukar say that she was known.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she was. Now, I'd like to come back, though, to I'm concerned about the documents, and I know that these particular documents were departmental documents, and there's a review going on by the Department of Foreign Affairs. But my concern would be, first of all, if they were left there, this particular set of documents left there for 4 to 5 weeks, I don't know, and I don't know who knows, what other sets of documents may have been left at Madame Couillard's apartment. And hopefully the Department of Foreign Affairs report will comment on that. And I know that these documents are secret, but my concern is that these documents, they were prepared in advance of a NATO meeting, that anything in there could have put at jeopardy the safety of our troops or NATO troops in Afghanistan. And I'm not trying to be alarmist, but we've just had a major break-in to a prison in Kandahar. But it's that sort of thing that, and you're probably not at liberty to comment on that because the information is secret, but I know that I would expect within the PCO there's a lot of information floating around there right now that probing into what actually was in the documents. And let me ask a more specific question. If you can comment on what was in those documents, I'd appreciate it, but you may not be able to do that. Have our NATO partners been informed of this security breach and potentially other security breaches, and what has their reaction been? Or are you aware of those facts?
Well, you're quite right, Mr. Cullen. Obviously, any inappropriate handling of secret documents is of concern. And indeed, the minister in this case took responsibility and resigned. But there were several steps taken afterwards. There is a review ongoing which includes an injury assessment, but there was a quick assessment made initially. But there were the briefing books, so they are fairly thick, and so the review is to do a thorough assessment of that. NATO was informed. There was not anything that either Foreign Affairs or myself on a quick review of them saw of the nature that you were talking about. That said, they were secret documents and they were clearly inappropriately handled. NATO was informed. There was also a check to see if there was any information that had been provided by our allies in confidence. Again, the preliminary view of that, which stands to be confirmed in the full review being conducted now, was that no, it was not. So the only ones informed were NATO.
Thank you. Hopefully, I don't know what the time frame is for the DFATE review, when we might see those results, when you, when the Privy Council office, the kind of timelines that you'd be looking at to come to grips with some of these facts, and whether they will reveal that sort of information. I hope they do, or at least, touch on those factors. I'd like to come back to the role of the PCO.
Would you like me to? I mean, my expectations is that the review will be complete by the end of July. We obviously are concerned to finish the review of everything involved with this, and that's the expectations by the end of July.
Okay. I'd like to turn now quickly just to the role of the PCO versus the PMO. Now, you talked about the update of Mr. Bernier's background check. By the way, I find it somewhat ironic that on the conflict of interest guidelines, the ethics commissioner, he's an officer of Parliament, but I have to go through this rigmarole all the time with my wife's assets and what happened. When I was parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance, they tried to have my wife set up a blind trust. They couldn't require it. So in other words, in terms of spouses, there seemed to be a different sort of set of guidelines, but nonetheless, it's not monopoly of Parliament. I just had a quick question then. In terms of the role of the PCO versus the PMO, you got the briefing by the RCMP in April 2008. The RCMP basically said, no, not a problem. But within the PCO, and there were even the newspaper reports and what have you, or within the PMO, someone somewhere must have sort of said, there's something that we need to sort of be careful about. So would it have been possible that someone in the Prime Minister's office, for example, said, well, we see this, but we don't think it's a problem because these are private matters? Or would you see it upon yourself, Ms. Bloodworth, to sort of flag it, notwithstanding the positive report you had on Mr. Bernier, to talk to the PMO people and say, I know we got a clean report, but I've been reading this stuff in the newspaper. Is everything copacetic? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, do you have a brief response?
Well, I'm obviously not speaking for PMO. Look, I've tried very carefully to stay with the actual facts. I'm certainly. We got the clearance, and we go by background checks. We go by information we get from the agencies qualified to do so. That's not different with this government than it was the government you were a part of or any government prior to that. And that's what we rely on.
Thank you. Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Bloodworth. I mean, it is kind of ironic that you said you just want to deal with the facts, and I get the feeling that other people want to deal with supposition and what people might or might not have known. But in response to, I think, this whole area is, you've made it very clear what the role of PCO is, where the information comes from. Somehow, my friends seem to have the idea that if you saw a picture of somebody, you should recognize them as either being okay or not okay. I don't think that's the role PCO is in, and if I'm wrong on that, please tell me, but it seems to me that all of my friends opposite seem to know an individual that I didn't know, and I don't think my colleagues on this side know. I have this difficulty in that if they knew, they didn't tell anybody, but that's not the role of PCO, I think, as you've explained it to us here today.
I'm not sure whether that's actually a question. I've tried to explain what we do with regard to background checks. PCO does provide advice on a whole range of things. I have not talked about any of those things today, so I don't mean to suggest that what we do with regard to background checks is the only thing PCO does.
But I think in regard to this issue, we're talking about one particular cabinet minister and his association with one particular person. My colleagues have indicated that everybody knew that person and have made certain assumptions about whether or not red flags should go up. I saw perhaps similar pictures that you did and others did and my colleagues on this side did. We didn't know the individual. I don't know why they would assume that you should know the individual or that the PMO should know the individual or anyone else should, and they should have done something about it. And it seems that if they knew, they should have brought that issue forward and certainly didn't. That I think from your evidence with Mr. Norlock that you were not informed by them if in fact they knew this person and were concerned about security. And if that is in fact the case, I don't know why we keep sitting here and trying to beat you over the head and the RCMP and everyone else about something that they think they knew but didn't tell anyone. And I don't know if you can tell us that there's some magic thing out there that PCO would I think it's a UFO kind of thing, that PCO would then assume that they should be concerned about a security issue about something they don't know. I'm afraid that there's probably not an answer in there or a question or whatever, but the whole thing seems to me to be ludicrous. We're looking at some kind of a conspiracy theory between the RCMP, PCO, PMO, and the only people that seem to know all the dangers are the members of the opposition. So, you know, I do respect you're here, and I don't know how you can answer, but try.
Well, what I've tried to describe is what is done with regard to background checks, which is one input to prime ministers as they decide on cabinet formation, and it is for this government as it was for previous governments. I certainly didn't mean to suggest when I said the opposition had not written to me or called me that they were under any obligation to do so. I wasn't, that wasn't the import of my answer, and if it was taken that way, that wasn't the way it was meant.
No, nor was I trying to suggest that. All I'm saying is that since this has occurred, they've certainly been in the press indicating that everybody else should have known. And all I'm saying is that they didn't tell anybody. I don't know how you could know these kinds of things and how you could then tell somebody else. You know, I guess it's just a mystery to me how everybody on that side seemed to recognize and nobody else did.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go over to Ms. Brown, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bloodworth, I identify with you. I, too, only know what I read in the papers. Perhaps we're both related to that American comic Will Rogers, who used to start every show with that particular line and then pull things out of his pocket about that he had read in the paper. But there will be some things that I think you probably do know and that are factual, and so I'll go on those questions. Could you tell me on what day and at what time of that day, whether it was morning, afternoon, or evening, that Madame Couillard's lawyer contacted the Government of Canada about the classified documents in her possession? So when did that information come to the attention of the government?
I can tell you when it came to my attention. I don't know when it came to Mr. Bernier's attention. That presumably will be looked at in the review. I learned sometime mid-afternoon on the 26th of May about the documents you're talking about now.
Yes. Was that a Sunday or a Monday?
That was Monday.
Monday. Okay, thank you. Do you know the name of the person who had contacted the government on her behalf?
No, I don't.
Okay. Do you know who of the Government of Canada communicated with her lawyer on the government's behalf? In other words, it's our understanding that they contacted the government and then the government contacted them to say what to do with the documents, to give instruction, in other words.
My understanding is it was through Mr. Bernier's office, but I qualify that by saying I don't know that. That's part of the review.
Okay, thank you. Do you know how the documents were retrieved from Madame Couillard's lawyer?
No.
Do you know to whom in the Government of Canada the documents were returned? Who actually received them on behalf of the government? I mean, they were the property of the government, so I assume somebody in the government had to receive them.
No, I don't. I know that the Department of Foreign Affairs got them sometime the Monday afternoon as well, but I don't know before that.
Okay, thank you. On what date and at what time were these classified documents finally back in the possession of the Government of Canada? So I think you've already answered that. You're saying sometime Monday afternoon the Department of Foreign Affairs actually said they had them. Okay. Now, did you personally watch the French TV interview with Madame Couillard on Sunday night?
No.
No. So no alarm bells would have gone off about that?
I didn't watch it, but I thought actually it was Monday night, but I may be wrong on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I thought it was Sunday night, but
The only reason I'm saying that is I thought it was the same evening that the ministerial change actually took place, but I stand to be corrected.
okay.
Which was Monday night. That's why I said
Yes.
that.
Now, considering these were NATO documents and they were briefing papers for a meeting that was yet to come, do you know of any mitigation efforts that have gone on with regards to our NATO partners in case our reputation as a country capable of securing documents is kind of tarnished now? Did any envoys go to the capitals of Europe, or did any envoys go to NATO headquarters, or was it just a phone call to NATO?
First, a correction to the first part of your question. They were not NATO documents. They were our documents.
Yes, but in preparation.
But they were about the NATO summit, which by the time this happened had already happened. The NATO summit was in early April.
Yes, I know.
But having corrected those 2 points, there was as I understand, a phone call made to NATO and a subsequent letter to NATO. There was a check made to see if there was any information in there that came from one of our allies, that was their information, and the first cut, and I premise it by saying the review will assess that more thoroughly, was that no, there was not. So there were not formal representations made to other capitals beyond NATO.
Thank you. Now, you said we're not an investigative agency. We don't do investigations. I understand that. In your capacity as National Security Advisor, do you ever ask for an investigation to be done of something that is maybe worrying you as the main advisor to the Prime Minister? Do you ever ask for an investigation, and have you ever done so, and did you do so in this case?
We would do it in relation to cabinet documents. If there was cabinet documents missing or something, we could ask for, usually that's an investigation that a department would do, but I could be in that case.
But you didn't ask for one this time?
On the cabinet documents, there was no reason to do that.
Okay, so you're really only concerned with cabinet documents?
No, I mean, I was trying to recall and answer your question. I was involved in the investigation of the unauthorized release of information with regard to the NAFTA issue. That was an investigation. So when I meant I was not an investigative body, I'm not an investigative body like the RCMP and CSIS. All departments conduct a form of investigation, if you like it. They look into things within their own purview, and they may hire people to help them with that.
But as, as National Security Advisor, I mean, supposing you heard something about some other department, some other case altogether that was going on in a department, and you weren't sure that you wanted them to do the investigation, might you call the RCMP and ask them to do it?
What I would do is call the Deputy Minister of that department and go through what because ultimately they are accountable. And if I thought it was wise because there's some indication of a crime, that's when the RCMP would be called in. I might suggest it to them. Yes?
Thank you. Okay, I believe that completes the first round. We'll go and start over again now. Mr. Desange.
Thank you. Ms. Bloodworth, you did indicate to us that there was a concern in your mind, and that prompted the statement in response to the RCMP testimony before the hearing, before us. That concern prompted your statement that the PCO issued. But what I want to know is who first thought that PCO should do this statement?
Well, first of all, I don't think I used concern. I think it's not an inappropriate one. I don't think it was my word. My word was a lot of speculation, and we did decide. And as I recall, I can't recall between Kevin Lynch and myself who first suggested it, but it was between the two of us.
Okay. And did you consult with the RCMP before issuing the statement?
Yes, we did.
And who did you consult with in the RCMP?
I personally consult. I think by the time I talked to the Commissioner, I was telling him what we're going to do, but I know that, I think, Rennie, you talked to...
I spoke to Deputy Commissioner Sukar, and I told him we were issuing a statement.
And what did Deputy Commissioner Sukar say to you?
Well, we talked at length about the pros and cons, but I don't recall him saying to me that it would impair an investigation.
right? What were the pros and cons?
Well, it was one day after they testified.
Yes, and what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Essentially, that it may look as if we were contradicting the RCMP. And we talked that through, and I said we were not contradicting the RCMP. We were trying to clarify media speculation.
Did he tell you it would not impair an investigation?
I don't know if we even talked about the issue of an investigation.
You just actually said, he said it would not impair an investigation.
No, I said we did not talk about that.
No, no. You actually said, he said to you, it would not impair an investigation.
I don't think I said that, sir.
Well, I would like the time to stand still, and if there is.
He didn't say it would impair an investigation.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant.
He did not tell you that it would impair an investigation.
Okay.
Yes. And what else did he say, though? What, in terms of the pros and cons, what else did he say?
Just what I explained, sir.
Yeah.
I can tell you what the biggest con from my point of view is.
Sorry?
I can tell you what the biggest con from my point of view. And my biggest con is that we do not normally talk about background checks at all.
This wasn't about a background check, ma'am. I'm sorry. You keep bringing it to the background check. This is about whether or not they raised any concerns with the PCO.
Which they would do through background checks.
No, they wouldn't. They don't have to only talk to you about background checks.
Okay.
Am I right?
Sorry, I was trying to answer your
question.
I
appreciate that.
If you don't want an answer, that's fine.
Thank you. Now, how long did this conversation last?
Not very long.
How long, ma'am?
I would say less than 10 minutes.
Less than 10 minutes. What you have said could be said in less than actually 2 minutes. What was the other 8 minutes spent on?
I said we spoke less than 10 minutes. I don't recall if it was 2, 5, or 10 minutes.
Do you have the notes of that conversation that you made at that time?
I don't know if I do.
Did you make notes?
I honestly can't remember.
Would you go back and check?
I will.
And whether or not you kept those notes? If you kept those notes, I would like you to advise the clerk.
I will.
And forward us a copy with any deletions that you might want to make because of national security. Now, the question that I have is, the Foreign Affairs review that is being done right now, is the PCO being asked to assist? And if so, in what capacity and in what way?
Yes, we are assisting. The request that went, the letter that went from the clerk to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs asked them to do it in close cooperation with the Director of Security Operations with PCO, which is Mr. Tardif.
Okay. And who is actually heading that investigation, ma'am?
The Director of Security Operations at Foreign Affairs, who is
Paul Meyer.
And have they enlisted the assistance of any forensic experts, including the RCMP?
They have hired a firm of investigators.
Have they asked the RCMP to assist?
No.
Thank you. I have to move over to Mr. Menard.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bloodworth, if the RCMP had told you that one of the ministers of the government had a relationship with someone who'd had significant involvement with organized crime on an ongoing basis, would you have informed the Prime Minister of that?
I would inform the Prime Minister about any information significant about his ministry.
OK. Donc, parce que vous auriez estimé dans ces circonstances.
Because you would have felt that there could be a possible security violation or breach.
I would have felt that the Prime Minister should know information I know about his ministers and have that. In the end, it is the Prime Minister's decision as to who is in his cabinet, and he should have the information that I have about that.
Bon.
Very well. If, in fact, Ms. Couillard's past is in compliance with what you've read in the newspapers, and she's had in fact, constant contact with 4 members of organized crime at the highest levels. Do you think that there was a possible security breach? Because you think you don't have any confirmation that Ms. Couillard has had close involvement with members of organized crime.
No, because I have enough real issues in my job to deal with without dealing with hypotheticals and speculation.
Bon, pourtant,
And yet, you think that your role is to inform the Prime Minister and to give him advice about security. Do you think that we can suggest to organized crime that if they can to infiltrate someone into the private life of a minister, someone who can get information for them, this path will remain open and neither the RCMP or PCO will be concerned or will bother to inform the minister or the Prime Minister?
non, comprenez-vous notre inquiétude?
Excuse me, do you understand our concern as regards security? Do you think that it's something trivial that a minister would have a sudden relationship with someone who's had close contacts with organized crime?
I have tried very hard, and I hope I have succeeded not to treat any concern raised by a member of this committee as trivial. I'm certainly not suggesting any concern is trivial. I have tried to be as accurate as I can about what the involvement we have is and what we do and what our role is in terms of advising the Prime Minister. If I've suggested in any way that means that I think what anything you're saying is trivial, that I apologize. That's never been my intent. I've only been focusing on what I do and my role.
Alors, pour l'avenir.
For the future, if you have to provide advice, for example, that before doing a more in-depth investigation, you should check whether there is anything in criminal data banks or on new partners or spouses of ministers' relationships with organized crime.
It's always possible to change the process for background checks or security clearances, indeed. And I think I've tried to indicate it a couple of times when it has changed over time. There is always a discretion to operate as to how much you do, because all of this takes time and effort and delays the formation of cabinets and so on. I'm not suggesting, and I've tried not to suggest anywhere, that somehow the existing system is perfect and never should be changed. But there are costs to changing processes, and I think Mr. Cullen referred to the idea of looking at spouses and so on at all has some implications for it. And any Prime Minister would have to consider, and depending on the circumstances and what was being considered, I would give appropriate advice to the Prime Minister.
Mais au fond, c'est ça que
The time is up, I'm sorry.
j'ai commencé à 16h44.
Started at 4:44. It's 49. Have we only got 5 minutes? Not 7?
Ah, c'est 5 minutes,
Cinq.
et non pas 5.
5 minutes.
OK, alors vous avez raison.
Yep.
We're on 5-minute rounds, not 7-minute rounds. Okay.
Madame Pretty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to clarify, if it is the Deputy Minister for each ministry that sets up the system of how documents are treated, retrieved, marked, etc., would it then be the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs that we should be calling to, and I'm not asking you if we should call that person, but would it be the Deputy Minister who could explain why classified documents could be gone for 5 weeks and not have the ministry notice?
What I said was the Deputy Minister is responsible for the system within their department of how secure documents are classified, handled, stored. Ministers are also responsible within their office as to how they are handled once they come within their office.
No, I understand that, but I'm getting the sense that given that they were missing for 5 weeks, that perhaps the Deputy Minister could offer us some insight on how they could be missing for that long, albeit Mr. Bernier took them and left them in an unsecured place. But for that length of time, you'd think the system would notice that. Could I ask who does your...
Well, if I could just add, that's one of the reasons for the review. You're quite right.
Yeah.
There is a concern about these documents, and that's why there is a review being conducted.
Who does the background checks for you?
Who does them? RCMP, CSIS. I'm sorry, what is your question? Which agencies or who in the Privy Council office?
Sorry, no, I take that somebody in the Privy Council office has a list of, potential people that the Prime Minister is looking at for cabinet or whatever, and provides that to you. Yes, I'm asking which agencies you use to, or you request to provide those background checks.
If I can refer to my opening statement, as I said, there's a 4-part verification.
Yes,
First part
I saw
is
that.
by the RCMP. The second part is by CSIS. The third part is tax compliance with regard to the Canada Revenue Agency. And the fourth part is insolvency, which is the superintendent bankruptcy.
So what we would then know is in April of 2008, both the RCMP and CSIS looked at the background check that was being updated on Mr. Bernier. I expect that is correct. The appointments that are made by ministerial appointments as opposed to Prime Minister appointments, do you know if there's, maybe an unfair question for you, but do you know if there are background checks done on those people?
There are background checks for all order and council appointees, many of which come from ministers.
So,
but it's a two-way check, not a 4-way check. So they do RCMP and CSIS. They don't do the other two. There may well be ministerial appointments that don't go through the order and council process where there may or may not. I don't know. Mark or Rennie, do you know?
I suspect there are, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. I think it would be interesting for the committee to know, Mr. Chair, at some stage whether Ms. Couillard's mother underwent a background check from both CSIS and the RCMP.
Oh, well, I believe she was an order and council appointee.
She was an OIC, so she would have had a background check from the RCMP and from CSIS that would have said there is no reason to be concerned. Okay.
All order and councils have a 2-way check done.
Well, yeah, so therefore I can presume then from what you said that CSIS and RCMP have said that Ms. Couillard's mother we would have no reason to be concerned about any of her connections or ties or whatever. Interesting. It feels to me, and this is not a critique of the Privy Council, it feels very passive to me, and perhaps that's the way it's set up, but that you do, if the RCMP brings something to you, you certainly pass it on to the Prime Minister. If you are given background checks to do, and I realize that you have a compendium of other things that you do, but that it is not that the PCO is not a proactive organization that would see something and ask someone to do something about it. They wait until, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but they wait until something is brought to them.
Well, I don't feel particularly passive these weeks.
I'm sure.
I've described what we do in regard to background checks.
Right.
I'm not sure I can answer any more than that.
Okay. And
you'll have to wrap it up.
Okay, one more. Sorry, just a sec. Yes, speculation. No, I'm not asking you to speculate. I guess I'm giving you a scenario. If the scenario that we're faced with turns out to be accurate, and it may all not be, the whole thing may not be, there may be no truth in any of it. I'm not sure that's true, but there may be no truth in any of it. So I'm not asking you to make some determination based on what you've read in the paper. But if it all turned out to be accurate, would you have expected the RCMP to inform you of that?
I'll repeat what I said before. I would expect the RCMP to inform me about any significant security issue involving a cabinet minister.
Thank you. Ms. Jennings.
You've stated before the committee, Ms. Bloodworth, that you learned about the missing documents late afternoon, early evening on Monday, the 26th of May. That's correct?
I think I said afternoon. It wasn't evening.
Well,
evening was when the cabinet switch occurred.
Okay, afternoon. Who informed the Prime Minister of these missing documents, and when was he informed?
I don't know exactly when. My understanding is he was informed by the minister.
By the minister.
That's my understanding, but I was not there.
Are you aware that the then minister, now former minister, has made two statements about that? One, where he says that he informed the Prime Minister on Monday, the 26th of May, and another statement where he says he informed the Prime Minister immediately that he learned of the missing documents on the Sunday evening.
I'm aware of his letter of resignation, which I think referred to a date.
Okay. Can you explain? You've said that there's a private security firm that's doing the investigation on the forensic policing security side for DFATE into the whole issue of the missing documents. Do you know why the RCMP is not conducting this part of the investigation?
Well, first of all, the review is being conducted by Foreign Affairs. They have hired a security firm to help them in that.
And I'm asking you, do you know why Foreign Affairs has decided to hire a private firm to assist them in their review of this entire affair of the missing documents, rather than ask the RCMP to assist them?
Well, part of what they're reviewing is not necessarily... The RCMP are called in for criminal investigations. At the moment, I'm not aware of any particular criminal issue related to the documents. The review will determine what the facts are, and that's what it's doing. And I think we may all have suggested the assistance of some professional investigators, which in the effort to do that.
In fact, Ms. Bloodworth, the RCMP investigate to determine whether or not there's evidence, sufficient evidence and reasonable grounds to believe a criminal act has been committed, and if so, do they have sufficient evidence to determine who committed the act, and then is the evidence reasonable and sufficient to support criminal charges against them? So I do not see why, but you may not be the right person to answer this, because you don't know what a person known to the police, what that term means. I fail to understand why the Foreign Affairs would not ask the RCMP, that are expert investigators, to assist them in that review, and clearly, if evidence of criminal activity came up, then the RCMP would clearly be well placed to do that.
Well, let me make 2 points on that. First of all, the review is about the documents and what happened to the documents and who did what and who had access and so on, and what injury. And actually, on the injury assessment, the RCMP actually wouldn't be very helpful on that, because it's not something you have expertise on. Second point, I would say, nothing stops the RCMP from investigating anything, anytime. They don't need my opinion, or my permission, or my request, or the Foreign Affairs request.
Thank you.
So none of it precludes anything.
Thank you. My question now is, and it relates something to what Ms. Pretty was asking about, whether or not PCO is passive rather than being active. Given everything that you've told us about the background checks on candidates to be appointed ministers, members of cabinets, secretaries of state, if anyone in PCO read a newspaper, watched on TV, heard on the radio or saw on some internet site that an individual who had a relationship, an ongoing and close relationship with a minister, was known to have been married to someone who was part of organized crime, on the point of marrying someone else who was part of organized crime, had other relationships and business dealings with Monsieur Pepin, etc. Do you think it would have been appropriate, whether it was you who saw it on TV or wherever you saw it from, or somebody in passing mentioned, you know that Julie Couillard? Did you know that, one of her former husbands was a close associate of Mame Boucher? And you say, who's Mame Boucher? And the person explains to you who's Mame Boucher. And then says, and that person also was getting ready to marry Monsieur Sirois. Who's Monsieur Sirois? And explains that to you. Would you at that time have thought it appropriate to say, ministers never told us any of that? Maybe, I wonder if he knows that, one. And secondly, if he knows it, why didn't he tell us? And thirdly, I don't know if any of this is true. Perhaps I should contact the RCMP and ask them to do a check to see whether or not any of these allegations are true, one. And secondly, if they are, does that have any implication for security?
Okay, Monsieur Menard, it's your turn.
Can I answer the question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
The first point I would make is what I have tried to say throughout is we provide our advice based on analysis and facts, not media speculation. We, of course, read newspapers, read more newspapers than we ever want to read at the Privy Council office. We do not base our advice on what is in the media. Second thing, I have contacted, the RCMP were contacted at least twice about Mr. Bernier, as I explained, in regard to the background checks.
Ms. Telak.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
I would just like to make one point. All of the information regarding Madame...
time to come around to you again.
Yeah, but all of the information regarding Madame Couillard's background became public after the second and most recent background check.
Ms. Telak, go ahead.
I made that point.
And I've just made it again.
Bonjour, madame. Ma première question.
Good afternoon. My first question. In your testimony, you said that last August, the government was conducting investigations for members of the ministry, and that was updated every 2 years, whether or not the minister changed positions. Before that, how often were the checks done? Before the rule changed, how frequent were the evaluations or the checks?
The norm has been before that to do checks when ministers changed offices or when cabinets were formed, which could mean that if a minister stayed in office for 4 years or 5 years, there would not have been any check done. There had not been any particular problem. This was just a sense of regularizing it more systematically. But they would have normally been done before that, at the time a minister changed office or when a cabinet was formed initially.
But if it were done in the past when the minister changed portfolio, theoretically, if the rule hadn't been in place last August, there would have been a new background check done on all ministers who changed ministry in the last shuffle. Now the rule is every 2 years, and that dated back to 2006. This new check was supposed to be done, therefore, in 2008. That's what I'm to understand from what you say.
It's true. If the rule had not been changed, we would have done background checks on the few ministers that changed office last August. Instead, background checks were done on all ministers in the March, early April period. But it's true, some would have been done last August, but none of the others would have been done until they changed office. So, I mean, it's...
Oui, mais là, il y
You
a
can
eu
do it
changement
either
de
way, but
portefeuille pour
that's-
plusieurs au mois d'août.
But a number of them did change portfolios last August. If the rule hadn't been changed, there would have been a check done on several of them. In the case of Mr. Bernier, the last check went back to 2006 in his relationship with Ms. Couillard. Well, in 2006, he wasn't seeing Ms. Couillard. And when the second check was done in April, he wasn't seeing her anymore, according to what he has said. So in any case, the fact that there was no check done when there was a change in portfolio, well, there was a breach in the investigation because he was seeing Ms. Couillard during this 2-year period, and he changed portfolios during that time. But there was no check done because there was the 2-year requirement.
It is a fact that if the norm had been passed historically, we would have done fewer background checks. We would have done them last August. Instead, we did them all, and we did them March, April. That's a fact.
Monsieur Ménard va continuer, merci.
Mr. Ménard will continue. Thank you. I think you can get a sense of what we're concerned about. I hope that's a good reason for answering us, rather than for beating around the bush. What we're concerned about is that certain things are said in the newspapers. You have read them in the newspapers. I understand that before you make a decision, you would like another source of information. But some things are said in newspapers that are disturbing if they are true. And in the case of a relationship with someone who's had a significant involvement with organized crime, I think that if the newspapers are talking about this type of relationship, there is something disturbing about that. Would you agree with that?
What more I can answer? I think I've already answered the question, so I'm trying not to repeat what I've said.
And when it is disturbing, don't you think you should call up the RCMP to check on the information? To check whether, in fact, the criminal data banks confirm what is said? And whether the newspapers at the time had confirmed that the person had a close involvement with organized crime?
At that time, we had checks that were complete in early April.
Bon, à l'avenir, allez-vous le faire? Si jamais ça se représentait?
In the future, I will follow.
In future, will you do it?
No system is perfect, and it can change. No doubt, and I've described how they can change.
Mais là, n'avez-vous pas
But it's not up to me to change the system. I give some advice, but in the end, it's prime ministers who decide. And I'm not talking about just this prime minister. It's this prime minister and all previous prime ministers for whom I've worked. It's they who decide who is in cabinet and what the measures they want to take, of which background checks is one small part of it.
Je vais vous en suggérer une facile, qui ne prend pas beaucoup de temps.
To make a suggestion that doesn't cost much and that doesn't take up a lot of time. It has to do with partners or spouses. Wouldn't it be advisable to ask the RCMP to check in their criminal data banks whether partners of ministers are not to be found there? And if they're there, why are they there?
There are always things that can be done in relation to spouses, and I think, as Mr. Cullen has pointed out, those have been of considerable debate. So it's not up to me to do that. That would be up for a government to decide they want to enlarge what they do.
Okay, Mr. Cullen, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to come back to maybe Mr. Tardif. You are the Director of Security Operations at the PCO. Je m'excuse, je vais parler en anglais.
Apologize. I'm going to be speaking in English. I do understand English as well. I'm going to listen to the French, but I do understand English.
So you're Director of Security Operations at PCO. Are you're responsible then for the processes of security within the cabinet operations and within the PCO itself? Is that correct?
Oui, j'ai plusieurs rôles dans...
Yes, I have a number of functions within my role as the Director of Security Operations. That's one of my roles.
If I was guessing, I would think that you probably also have a network of people that you work with, law enforcement, security people. You have an informal network. Is that correct or not? Or you focus solely on the processes?
Well, I have a network that's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, because I'm coming back to this point that the background checks were updated in April 2008. I don't know the exact, can't remember the exact timing, but the stories, I think, started to come out in the press after that. That's fair enough. And I know you don't believe everything in the press, but there were some photographs there and some other evidence that someone, somewhere within the PCO, it seems to me, or the PMO, must have sort of, asked a question. And I'm wondering, it's quite a sensitive matter in the PCO to raise this with the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, but is that the kind of thing? Could a conversation have occurred, notwithstanding the fact that you had a background check in April 2008, which cleared Mr. Bernier, but with all the other stuff coming up subsequent to that, would it have been something that could conceivably have, did it happen in this case, or could it have happened that you briefed Mr. Tardif, Ms. Bloodworth, Ms. Bloodworth might have discussed it with either the Prime Minister or the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, that notwithstanding this clean security clearance, there seems to be some noise out there that someone might want to check out. Would that sort of discussion occur, or that kind of process?
No. This discussion didn't occur.
In this particular case, it didn't. No. And is there any particular reason why it didn't?
No. The background check was already, as explained, was already done on Monsieur Bernier.
But in May, I think, when these stories started to surface, and I mean, I know it's only a newspaper report, but there were photographs of Julie Couillard with all sorts of organized criminals. As the Director of Security Operations, would you not have a network of people that you could try to substantiate that, notwithstanding the clean background check in April 2008, just to make an assessment, there's something that doesn't seem to add up here? That never happened, and that might not ever happen?
It didn't happen. My role is to manage the background check policy in place, and that's what I've done with in this regard.
So then you were working on the assumption, and Madame Bloodworth working on the assumption that given the clean background check, that these stories, these photographs were fictitious or not believable, or, I mean, I'm just talking about the reasonable person. I mean, I read those newspaper articles as well. I saw the photographs, and I don't believe everything I see in the newspapers, but if I saw those, I think as a national security advisor or director of security operations, it would have twigged something. It seems to me that there might be something that, of concern here. That didn't happen, is that right?
That's correct.
It didn't happen. Okay.
I think we've answered that, Mr. Collins.
Sorry?
I think we have answered that.
Well, you've
all
answered
that
it.
presumes that there's something illegal going on and something that we haven't agreed to. So, anyway.
No, I understand that. I mean, I understand there's a process, and you did the updated background checks in April 2008, but, I would expect, and certainly, I know you can't answer for the PMO, and we'll have a chance, hopefully, to do that, but someone in the PMO who is responsible for making sure the Prime Minister doesn't get into trouble because there's a minister who has some relationships that are cause for concern, someone must have flagged this. I mean, I just find it impossible to believe that no one flagged it. I find it surprising, frankly, that the PCO didn't flag it at some point in time to someone in the PMO, or, I mean, to raise it with the minister would be a bit delicate, I agree, but so that never happened. Even the newspaper reports then and all the photographs of all these organized criminals with Mr. Couillard, you concluded that there's not any evidence to suggest that that has any substance to it, and therefore we're not concerned.
Our concern is always with cabinet ministers, as it always has been. I was not making any judgment on anyone else, including someone who might be talked about in the newspaper.
I guess I'm coming back then to a point that, and I know that, yeah, okay, just a quick point that I think that hopefully out of this review, someone's going to be looking at, spouses and significant companions because, and can I have one quick question? Sorry, the Department of Foreign Affairs, their review, they're not going to be limiting their review. They aren't limiting their review, I'm guessing, but I'm hoping not, just to the documents that were left in Madame Couillard's apartment, because we don't know how many other documents may have been left there over time. Their review is not limited, hopefully, just to that set of documents, is it?
No, that's not the only thing we have done. I mean, we did call for cabinet documents to be returned from Mr. Bernier's office, which is the normal thing when a minister leaves cabinet, and they will review all of the process of dealing with secret documents. And I agree with you. I would hope if there are other documents missing, that would become part of the review as well.
Okay. Ms. Brown?
Ms. Bloodworth and Mr. Tardif, all we've heard so far, despite sort of a general concern in the media and certainly in the opposition that maybe something was awry, all we've heard from you is that essentially after conducting the background checks, it seems as if your work was over. What is it that you do advise the Prime Minister about from a security perspective? Maybe you could give us a couple of topics that you're working on right now, because for a viewer who's watching this program on television, they must wonder what the National Security Advisor and her staff do. I mean, other than background checks. Surely there are other security issues. Are they of a geopolitical nature? Are they of a personal safety nature? What are they about?
Well, first of all, background checks are a very small part of my particular day, any day.
That's why I want you to tell us a little bit about what you do.
I tried to not take too much of the committee time, but at the beginning of my opening statement say there are a large number of security issues confronting this country. I gave a couple of examples of preparations for the security preparations for the G8 and for the 2010 Olympics. Those are certainly things that I would be involved in coordinating with other government departments. There are issues with regard to national security on terrorism. There's an advisory committee on national security meeting this week that I would be involved in. So I'm not trying to suggest, and that was not the intent of my remarks, to say I spend lots of time on background checks. I was just trying to explain what we do with regard to background checks and the difference between them and security clearances, which is quite significant.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Have we exhausted all our questions? Ms. Jennings?
Yes. Thank you. À la page 2 de...
On page 2 of your text, last paragraph, second sentence of this check, and here we're talking about the background check, and it has to do with the background check, you say. The idea is to make sure that there is no criminal, security, or other concerns which could affect the suitability of people for public office.
For public office. Would allegations that a spouse of a minister had possible close links to organized crime be something that, if it came to your attention, either during the actual background check or subsequent to the background check, a concern that you would investigate or have checked into in order to determine whether that would affect their suitability for public office?
Or other concerns in this particular case refers to the fact that we also do a tax compliance check and a bankruptcy check.
So in that case, your answer is no. Any allegation that came to your attention by whatever means that the spouse of a minister had close links and ties to organized crime is not a concern that would possibly call into question the suitability of that minister for public office and require a further check.
It's a private life.
All I said was that I was just explaining to you what other concerns mean. When it comes to criminal insecurity, which are two inputs to cabinet making, prime ministers consider, and those of you who have been cabinet ministers will know, they consider many, many other factors besides what comes from the background check. So there are many things that affect whether or not a prime minister decides to make someone a cabinet minister. What I have tried to do is explain to you what the process with regard to background checks as one input into that process is.
And my question remains, if an allegation that a spouse of a minister had close links and ties to organized crime came to the attention of Monsieur Tardif as Director of Security Operations, or to you or to any other member of Privy Council, would that lead you or Monsieur Tardif to ask for a verification of those allegations?
Organized crime is obviously a concern in this country as it is in many Western countries. And I obviously have, I would expect if there was a significant concern about ministers' connection with organized crime, that would come out of a criminal or security check.
And given that you've told us that at no time did the RCMP or has the RCMP informed you that they have any concerns regarding Mr. Bernier's relationship with Madame Couillard, then I have to suppose then that either the RCMP is keeping information from you or the RCMP has not conducted an investigation into that situation, or is at this time conducting such an investigation but has not come to any conclusion.
I wouldn't necessarily come to those conclusions.
You would know.
I wouldn't necessarily come to those conclusions.
Thank you. I find it interesting that an average person hearing about the possibility that a minister was involved with someone who has clear ties or is alleged to have had clear ties and links with Mambouché. I don't think there's a person in Quebec that doesn't know who Mambouché is. People died because of Mambouché, including people who work for the state, who work for the province of Quebec.
Your colleague is waiting for you.
That they would think that that was not worthy of somebody saying this needs to be checked out.
Okay, order. Mr. Desange, you are the last person on my list, so I guess you're batting cleanup.
Thank you. Emma, I want to take, Ms. Marcoux, I want to take you back to the conversation that you had with the RCMP. Can you, to the best of your memory, recite that conversation for the committee? We have some time. How did it start?
Well, it started with me advising Deputy Commissioner Sukar that we were planning on issuing the statement that we did issue.
Yes.
And explaining the reasons why, because media speculation following his testimony suggested that we knew something or that they had advised us of something.
And his response was that it is so shortly after so soon after their statement to the committee?
I think so. I mean, I don't have a precise recollection of what he told me, but as I indicated earlier, that's what it was.
And then it was during that 10-minute conversation he indicated to you that whatever the statement will not impair any investigation.
I believe I said he did not indicate that to me.
Was he silent on that issue with you?
I believe he was, but
when you told him you're going to issue a statement...
The reason, sir, I'm certain about, or not certain, but the reason I think I can tell you this is because if he had said it will impair an investigation, I think I would have probably gone back to my to Mrs. Bloodworth and said this is probably not a good idea.
So he was, obviously, he was silent on that particular point during the conversation. That's what I understand from what you just told me.
I think so, yes.
And if he was silent on that issue, did you indicate to him, did you ask him about his evidence before the committee and point out to him what he had said before the committee?
Well, he said that Mrs. Couillard was known to the RCMP.
Yes.
And I believe he explained to me what known could mean in that sense.
But did he also indicate to you that he would not reveal to us whether or not the RCMP had contacted the PCO for fear of possibly jeopardizing an investigation in the past or in the future or present?
Well, I spoke to him after his testimony.
Yes, but did he raise that concern with you? Or did he mean by saying, you know, I'm concerned your statement comes so shortly, so soon after my evidence before the committee, did he mean by that you would be outing the RCMP on that issue when they themselves wouldn't out themselves?
Well, I'm not sure I understand that. I'm sorry.
Well, they would disclose to you, but not disclose to us. That they would allow you to disclose their position, but they would not disclose directly to us.
Our statement did not disclose the RCMP position on whether or not they investigate Madame Couillard.
Your evidence, your statement disclosed the fact that they did not contact the PCO, and they would not disclose that to us. Let me ask you another question, the last question. Why is Mr. Lynch not here? He was invited to be on before us. Why is he not here?
Because the committee indicated he wasn't necessary.
Absolutely not. The committee
I'm sorry,
put him.
That's the information we had.
I want to know who in the committee indicated to you that he wasn't necessary. The committee put him on the list. I put him on the list. There was no objection. He was asked for. Your name was added subsequently in addition to Mr. Lynch's name, Ms. Bloodworth. I want to know who from the committee told you he wasn't needed.
What I'm saying is Mr. Lynch was very willing to come to the
That's not the issue, madam. Who told you?
Well, I'd like to answer the question.
No, the question is who told you that he wasn't needed?
I am trying to answer the question. I am saying Mr. Lynch was very willing to come to committee. The indication we got back, I presume through the clerk, was that the committee was quite happy to have the three of us.
Well, I'm sorry. That's not my understanding. His name was at the top. We had the list yesterday, and his name was still at the top of the PCO individuals to appear here.
We had an in-camera meeting yesterday, and I don't reveal the results of that, but we agreed to invite the PCO officials, and that's what went forward.
No, I'm sorry. During the meeting, you told me the PCO is coming.
That's right.
Yes, you didn't tell me Kevin Lynch wasn't coming.
And his name was on the list.
His name was on the list.
The top of it.
And I want to know why that is the case. I was not told Kevin Lynch isn't coming. I want to know why that request, when it was discussed in the committee, the list was with you, why the chair chose to omit him.
Yes,
I find it rather ironic. We've been here 2 hours, and all of a sudden we have an eruption about the witnesses. I think that you've heard from perfectly good witnesses. If you had an issue with the witnesses,
Sir,
I believe you should have brought it up.
I can satisfy myself, but I want to know why would the committee chair? Why would the committee chair take it upon himself to say a certain witness is not required when that witness tops the list?
Yes. Yeah. I would like to refer you to your original motion, which we are carrying out. Please go and read it, and then it'll contradict exactly what you're saying today.
No, the question is, a list of witnesses was given, sir, in this committee, and Kevin Lynch's name was topping the list of individuals in the PCO.
Sir.
And the question I have is, who decided that Lynch is not required?
That list of witnesses was not yet approved.
Who approves that list, sir? There is no
we
process.
do on the committee. Your own
committee
people are
approves together.
You, sir. Your own people were at this meeting, and we agreed.
Sir, Kevin,
that
we did not agree. Kevin Lynch was not disapproved. Kevin Lynch was not disapproved.
I would like to thank the witnesses very much. We appreciate you coming before the committee. This meeting stands adjourned.